By the way, how many of you have dabbled with AJAX? Actually, how many of you are not aware of what it is? Any of you? So I'm assuming that you know what AJAX is, and some of you would have done some programming using AJAX. And how many of you are not aware of what SOA is? Okay. So what I'll try to do is cover these 5 aspects. Basically, we had spent last 1.5 years in building a AJAX framework which can be used in conjunction with SOA to consume services. And what I'll try to do in this talk is to tell you how you can go about building your own framework. And whatever we have learned, I'll try to pass on. Parallelly, I'll try to show whatever we have done. So essentially, I'll start with talking about why did we build this framework instead of choosing some which is already available in the market. Am I audible in the back? Then what the framework can actually do, and if there is what is unique or what is different from all the other framework that is available, how does it work, and finally some guidelines on how you can venture into building your own framework. Why did we do this? There was a need. We had a client-server application which was written in Visual Basic quite some time back, and that needed to be migrated onto a browser front end so that it can be accessed by anybody. However, the users of the application were so used to a client-server model of responsiveness, they are not willing to accept a typical browser type of interface. You know the difference between a client-server version of an application and what you normally get on a browser? On a client-server, it's very responsive. You do something immediately, like if you enter a name, it will immediately validate and probably tell you, get some more detail about it and show it. Whereas if you try to do the same thing on a web, what will happen is it will normally involve a page refresh. Now with AJAX today, we are trying to overcome this problem of responsiveness and trying to simulate the client-server environment on a web. There are a host of other technology which are not purely dependent on the browser, but we wanted to be open source. We didn't want to be dependent on a proprietary technology like Flash, or actually Silverlight was not there at that point of time. We wanted to choose an open technology, which is one of the criteria. And when we started, there were not very many frameworks which could deliver whatever we wanted. So the whole exercise we started. So essentially we had 3 alternatives. One is AJAX. AJAX, as you know, uses basically the power of browser. It uses JavaScript. It manipulates the HTML. Using DHTML, it manipulates the browser DOM and tries to do a rendering without refreshing the page. Second is extending the browser capability. How do you do it? Plugin. The 2 most popular ones are, of course, Flash and its other variants which are coming up, and of course now Silverlight, which is in a beta. So you come out of the power of what browser can do, but put something into the browser which gives you the responsiveness of a client-server environment. And third is, of course, you choose a non-browser environment, which Mozilla is trying to promote. A separate one which is not a browser. You can build a .NET front end which will do all that, but then that has the limitation that those things need to be installed on the particular machine, which is different from the browser. And browser anyway, it's available today, which becomes much simpler. So we sort of chose to go by the AJAX route and stick to a standard. So one reason I have already talked about is that it's non-proprietary. The second one is of very interesting is that we discovered that the real power, what you can do using AJAX is quite substantial, and you can replicate most of the client-server functionality using the power of what is already there inside the browser without having to put some other additional plugin. Just to illustrate the point, just have a look at these two sites. This is a mail application. You use Microsoft Outlook? Microsoft Outlook? You use the web version? There's a web version. How is the web version implemented? It doesn't use any plugin. It manipulates the browser HTML DOM model. It uses JavaScript. It is replicated on practically all the functionality of what is available on a desktop. The second example, you have heard of this company, Zoho? You have heard of Google Apps? Right? Zoho is considered as a very strong competitor for Google, and there are many people who feel that Zoho has much more power in what they already have. Did you know that it's an Indian company? It's based out of Chennai. It's an Indian company which has promoted this, and they have a host of Office application. And this is an example from their site about a spreadsheet. This again is done using what is the power of browser without you are needing to resort to some other plugin or some other interface. So anything that you do, if you develop a framework, it needs to be named. So we called it Enrich. Since we wanted to enrich the experience, we called it Enrich. Yeah, to start with, let's have a look at one of the Enrich screens. This doesn't look like a browser screen, right? So this is one typical screen which you had made using Enrich as a part of the application. So you see there is a drop-down menu, just like a typical client implementation. You have a tree implementation here. Though our tree could probably be improved, we don't have those dotted lines, but those are some minor refinement which we need to do. You also have a simulated tab folder, where as and when you click on each of the folder, this part of the content will refresh. So this is a screen with some typical example of a client-server type of interface that you expect on a browser. Now the question is that to get a screen up, what do I need to do as a developer? When you use this framework, you do something like this. So you define a page, which again is XML, because everything you do today is an XML, including some of the other sessions you would have gone through. Wherever people are trying to put a definition, it is always in XML. So we also use XML. So for a page, this menu gets defined like this. There are menus and you have different menu items. Against the menu item, you have the type of menu, and you can attach an event to it, on-click event, and you can, through another XML syntax, specify what you want to do with the event. Now the question is, how do we render it? Now if you have gone through some of the other sessions, whether it is a Adobe or whether it is a JSF, everybody either puts a additional tag in your HTML or has a separate XML to do that. And most of the time, what happens is that it is there in the server, it gets merged with the data, and the server ultimately throws a HTML page to the client, right? So it's a view from the server. That is, you have to render something on the client, you form it on the server and send it across. And many of the platforms that you have today, they seem to have an aversion towards letting developer work with HTML and JavaScript. If you have attended other session, there is a talk about how developer need not know JavaScript, as if there is something very difficult or complex about it. And as if it is much more complicated than Java. If you have used JavaScript, the syntax are very close to Java, and it has probably much less complication about it than using Java. So we chose to say that if you are doing a client-side implementation, why don't we use the client-side technology rather than trying to do it from the server and showing it? It's something like, all of you must be watching IPL sometime or the other. There's an ad which is coming, Asian Paint ad, about paint. आप पेंट कैसे सोचते हो? It's like sitting on the client and trying to think what is going to, sitting on the server and trying to think what is going to appear on the client, and then translating from the server to the client. So a very indirect way. So we chose the other way. We said that if you are going to use the browser side and the client side, let's use the technology of the client side rather than trying to do it from the server and then transmoding it. So whatever we do happens on the client. The page XML gets transported on the client and it uses JavaScript to paint the page. And you have a control over what you are doing. And how does it happen? So you have a rendering engine which is written in JavaScript. You have a page XML which I showed you a small snippet. And you have a component library. What's a component? You have a menu. So in that example you saw there is a menu and the menu item. So whenever the XML page, the rendering engine locates a menu item, menu and menu item in the page XML, it will go and look for a corresponding implementation, a JavaScript, which can take the XML and do the corresponding painting on the browser. So for every tag that you have, menu, tab folder, everything, there will be a corresponding function, JavaScript function in the component library. Now you will ask that there are so many other methods of rendering a page. You have XAML, you have XUL, you have OpenLaslo, you have a format which is part of your Adobe. Why should I use something non-standard created by me or somebody else? The whole idea is that simplicity, transparency, and standardization. One of the biggest problems today is that when you take a framework, that you will have hundreds and hundreds of choice of doing something. If any of you have programmed in Visual Basic and moved to VB.NET, you'll find that the number of components available is at least 5 times. Like VB had a simple set of components which you are developing application. In the .NET, the same number has increased by a factor of 5. And for each of those components, the number of methods and properties has at least increased by 3 times. Which means that if you took, say, about 3 months to master Visual Basic, you will take about 3 years to master VB.NET. Still, you will not know what is there. So this increase in complexity, in a way, is going to affect what you really do. Because for everything that you want to do, there are half a dozen alternatives, each with its plus and minus. And by the time you figure out which is the best way, you have wasted time. So when you are going to implement something, there is a great advantage in standardizing, especially from an enterprise perspective. If you are building an application which has, say, 100 pages, and there are some team of some 20 developers working on it, if you standardize, if you give them the limited way of implementing features, you first of all, you will achieve a uniform look and feel across. You will reduce the time each developer spends in exploring how to implement a particular feature, and thereby you will get productivity. So if you are building a framework, you can limit your list of tag sets to what you really want and implement it. Second is transparency. If you use any of the other technology like JSF and all that, it is difficult to figure out that if I do something in this tag, exactly how it is painting on the client side. It's not a very straightforward process. There are many levels of transformation which happens, and to figure out how the correlation between the two is difficult. So if something is not working or something is to be made to work in a slightly different way, it's very difficult. But in this case, you have a one-to-one mapping between your tag and a particular JavaScript function. which means that you can easily find out, okay, if this is there, this is how it is getting implemented. So it is very transparent. And finally, the whole thing is very simple. Just an example, our framework is about 1/3 of an MB, and the corresponding, some of the popular AJAX frameworks, they are, anyway, it's there. It's a rhetorical question. How many of you have developed, created a web page with HTML and trying to simulate a button? Very rarely in a web page, what you see as a button is actually a button. It's not a button. It will be either a text or it will be an image. With the image with some mouse over, the image changes and so on. But you ultimately want a button. So if you go, there are sites available which are button makers. You go to the site, it will make a nice button for you. I went to a particular site and just picked up examples of different buttons. But what you really want to do is make a button. So here, in a project, if you are doing a big application, you will want to have buttons. You will not want the standard HTML button. You may want to implement it in a different way, but you will want it standard across your application. So if you have one function to render this, the developer doesn't have to worry about how it is done, but it will be uniform. But you can choose. It need not be the only standard drab button that is there. Just some of the other examples of the different controls that we have implemented. This is a typical toolbar. When you take them off, what happened? Problems with technology. You can specify an image, what is the type of image, and you have related events to that. The toolbar is implemented in such a way that when you move the mouse cursor over it, it will get highlighted like a typical toolbar. Then you have a context menu, which can again be implemented like this. I'm not going into all the details, but just quickly giving you some examples of what we have done. This is a tree. Our tree implementation is, it's only visually so-so. It can definitely be improved. There are better tree implementations using JavaScript, which can be incorporated. But the tree definition, if you see, is very simple. Then you'll ask the question of, okay, this is a tab folders. So you can have multiple tabs, and under the tab you can put your content. So it becomes an XML structure. Then you'll ask the question, how do I actually merge the data? When does it get merged? Because you have put a page. So what happens is that we are making an assumption that this is a client-side framework where every interaction with the server happens through a service. Typical in an enterprise, you will want to implement a service-oriented architecture where all the request and response is through a service. You can use different protocols. But essentially what we are assuming is that I can make a request to the server and get my data back. If I want details about an employee, I send a request to a particular service giving the employee ID, and I'll get an XML which will give me the details of the employee. So in the server side, I have different controls which can take this XML, merge it with the page definition and show. For example, this is what we call it as a free-form implementation, where in my data buffer, I am assuming that I have fetched the data and is available in my data buffer, and there is a node which has this X path, which will map onto this whole control, and this specific input cell is a sub-child node of that, which can be located by this. So that mapping will be done automatically. It will pull the data from the data control, data XML, and put it here. This is clear?
The HTML generation happens at server side or?
The HTML, yeah, if I just go back. As I was talking about, we are taking a view that everything happens on the client. You pull the XML and it is rendered using JavaScript at the client.
For that, the browser must be compatible with this framework to render that XML.
Basically, you have two browsers, which takes about how much percent? 95, 96%. IE and Firefox, Mozilla. There are differences of implementation in these two. So the JavaScript has to take care of which browser it is and render accordingly. Similarly, we have a grid implementation. We have spent a lot of time implementing this grid. And here also it happens in a similar way. You map the grid to a particular node in the data buffer, and each of the column gets mapped to a sub-element of that. And in our implementation, of course, we support pagination. You can sort the columns, and you can resize it, reorder it, and typical functionality of the grid. It do require some amount of programming, but it's available, it's possible. So as I was telling, all the interaction with the server, whether you want to fetch the page XML or whether you want to fetch data for the data buffer, happens through a service request. We have used plain XML HTTP request using, as they call it, POX, plain old XML, where you send the request as an XML and receive the request, the data back as another XML, which gets populated into the data buffer. It's possible that we have also implemented a REST style of query, and it's also possible that if you write a suitable interface here, you can use SOAP to get the data so that you can work with any web service. Now, the next point will be that how do you handle user events? Essentially, when user enters some data here, yeah.
We use JavaScript.
Yeah.
And then we have service to the rest. All the way problems, programming issues.
Can you elaborate it?
Like in JavaScript, generally it doesn't support programming calls, right? So we are trying to answer a service, after a service using JavaScript, make JavaScript. What's it take on that?
See, what we have basically implemented is using an XML HTTP request, which you can fire from a JavaScript. So you send an XML to any address, and it will give you the response to take it and consume it.
Yeah, maybe in any type of thing. For example, if I am using Google API or Google API, they have service that we can consume for our data, for example. Or in this Google API, what happens is if you value to use some restriction request, the alternate policy makes it possible to generate the response XML. So, what are you doing for that?
See, basic idea here is that if you can write if you can access the service through a particular code in JavaScript, you can put a wrapper here and then you can make a request. So if it is not possible to access particular sites from a particular browser because of some firewall or some other restriction, then anyway you can't implement that.
No, but it requires some settings to be done at the Internet Explorer site. Let's say I as an example. Sometimes what happens is if you make an XML HTTP request to access a site from the client side, to access a website to create some other domain from the client side, it gives you cross-domain issues.
Yeah.
That's what you were saying.
Yeah, so that setting you have to...
And we have to make that setting and that Internet Explorer to overcome that issue.
Yeah.
So would it be the same case here?
Yeah, because if the internal you are using only whatever feature is provided by the browser. and you are restricted by whatever restriction is put by that specific implementation of that particular browser for the client. So if the browser doesn't allow you to do certain things, it will not be able to do that.
So that means there is actually a limitation on the site, because whoever is accessing the sites need to know that this is the setting that needs to be done before the web service should work.
Yeah.
Or should work.
So in this particular case, we were trying to implement it on a enterprise type of environment, where partly it will be used within the intranet and partly it will be used by specific designated user. So the whole idea of this was that it will be used by a limited set of users who need the rich functionality, like a client-server application. So in such a case, you will give instructions saying that this has to be the browser setting for accessing this site. In fact, we implemented a feature of working offline, which needed this some of the XML to be saved on the local machine, for which you need to have a different security level. You need to allow the files to be saved. So that needs to be set. Does it answer your question? Probably not satisfactory.
Problem remains the same. Actually, what if it is the range of user who are clients are not in the same domain, are not in the internet. They are accessing our application through the internet somewhere else. What happens then?
So that limitation will apply. The moment you want to access an XML, HTTP, or what you can do is you can switch over to a REST type of request.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Suppose because you are rendering everything on the browser, suppose some problem happens, how do you debug it? There will be a problem, right? Debugging and fixing.
Yeah, debugging in JavaScript is a problem, but now there are some engines available under Mozilla which allows you to actually look through the JavaScript, how it is running and things like that. You go back to the old method of putting alerts and trying to see how it is.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
In the XML-based, the XML you are laying out the components.
Yeah.
How you are taking care about the layout, like where it is placed, where it is placed in the screen.
Yeah. Basically, what we
I
have.
want to have the create right hand side and have control on that. So how I do?
Essentially, what happens is we have two types of panels. One is the horizontal panel, one is the vertical panel. So first, in this particular screen, if we go back to the previous one.
Do you have a permission to specify that also in XML?
Yeah, so you put a panel. Maybe you say this panel will contain this menu, this freeform, and it will contain another horizontal panel. And the horizontal panel will contain a tree and a tab folder. Like that, you break it up. So if you see most of the pages, you can either break it up into horizontal and vertical panels. And then inside that, you put your specific container control, and inside that, you put individual control. Yeah.
You can specify the components to display, but how are you specifying the layout?
See the layouts here, if you see, it is appearing one below the other.
Yes.
Here it's appearing on the side of the other.
How do you control that?
When you put a grid, it automatically comes like this.
Grid is okay.
When you put a freeform like this, it comes one below the other.
So you don't have control over how to adjust those.
Yeah, you can put some gaps, you can adjust the widths. You can say that, okay, this next control will come by the side.
Okay, those are specified using XML.
Yeah.
So how do you specify that where exactly?
You don't specify by giving the location.
Okay.
It is done by relative positioning. So, if you look at applications like this, here you actually want it to be organized horizontally or vertically. It's not you're not talking about a typical website where you put anything anywhere. This is a more data intensive one. Okay?
So what are the popular layouts that are available?
Yeah. And if you want a different type of layout, you need to make one more control like that and write the corresponding JavaScript.
Do you have an ID available for this or it's on XML based?
It's basically XML based. Our experience with ID is that unless it is very powerful, the developer will do the first version using ID, that ultimately they go into XML and start editing it manually. And that's our experience with most of these things. So we didn't try to venture into creating went to the effort of creating an IDE.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about developing rich applications, this basically uses JavaScript for passing XML.
Yeah.
Compared to standard AJAX application where most of the processing happens on the server side, will the loading of web page be not pretty slow if we have a rich application, a lot of XML?
Yeah, actually there are two parts to it. AJAX by definition is asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and it basically involves DOM manipulation. So the question is, the first version of the page may get formed on the server side, but any further manipulation you have to do using JavaScript. And second thing is that with today's power of today's machine, you won't even notice. In fact, you actually will reduce some amount of load from the server and transmit to the client, and you will not even notice the difference. Even though,
For example, we have a lot of rich user interaction required. You typically have to go back to the server in a way that user will not experience that which is encountered with the server. That is what it is. So we have, if in any case you need to get the whole XML data back to the browser and load it again, right? So
see, in this case, what happens is once you transfer an XML, it is held here in the buffer. You won't have to next time get the XML again.
but in case this is user image and some data changes.
Yeah, so for example, if you have this, for this grade, there is an XML definition which is stored in the page XML. The actual data is stored in the data buffer. Now, if you give a different search and this has to change, all you do is you go and get the new data, you use the same XML which is available here and refresh this one without affecting anything else.
Unless the data itself is not really.
That's all. Like if you're showing this different data in the same format, you don't get the page XML. You use whatever you already have. Do the merging using JavaScript and refresh only this part without touching the rest of it. Yeah, we were talking about user events. Now the question is, when you make changes to the data here, how do I post it back to the server? So what it does is that in the HTML you generate event so that every time when the field changes, this data is posted back into the data buffer. And that happens automatically. And while doing that, it will also do the basic validation about the field type. So, whenever you are posting back to the server, you invoke another service, take the change data and post it back to the service. So this is what I was talking about. There are a set of implicit action which happens when user enters something or keeps. One is your transfer of data from the HTML controls into the data buffer, checking of data type, perform some declarative validation, like you can give a range check. So such type of things can be done. And exception handling, if there is an exception, it will automatically handle by showing a standard error message, error box. On top of that, you can write JavaScript to handle the action. There are certain set of standard actions available. You can have a few actions which is common across your whole application, or you can write specific actions for a given page. So the actions can be classified into this three broad category. One is about your service invocation, where first category is you get data from the server, you put the updates back, or you can use some other service invocation which will trigger something which happens on the backend, some business service. Second is of course your navigation, which relates to moving from one page to another, or refreshing content in the existing page, or refreshing part of the page. And third is that, which is the real dynamic part of the AJAX, where you change the look and feel and the control what is there in the particular page. we find that it is very easy to extend this framework. So if you just create a tag, you decide the XML structure, write a corresponding JavaScript function to render it, write another set of function to handle the event. And it's easy to extend it. For example, we have added Google Maps. So you can take the address, post it to Google Maps and get it rendered in another page. Similarly, it can be done for Flickr or take care of any RSS feed and things like that. Yeah.
Talking about the event, what is the security in the
Yeah, basically what we have assumed, I'll come to that probably a little later. So essentially what have we learned in the basic principle of trying to do this is that we have taken these 5 parameters, the scalability, simplicity, power, security and productivity. I'll go through what we have assumed in each of them. When you talk about scalability, you are trying to say that, okay, for the application to be scalable, if you reduce the load on the server, if you reduce the network traffic, you will be able to support more users. And since we are removing some of the actions from the server side to client side, and we use caching as much as possible. That is, if you get one XML, you cache it on the client so that you don't have to fetch it again. We even allow some master data to be cached. That is, if you get a list which is to be shown as a drop down, you cache it and keep it. So by doing these two, we reduce the load on the server and the network traffic. This we had seen earlier, that the framework is quite lightweight, it's simple to use, and the clear separation of concern, that is, what is there on the server side, we don't try to replicate in the client, and what is to be done in the client, we don't try to do it on the server side. And the other interesting fallout of this is that if you are building an application which is a service oriented and you are trying to do the thing together, what happens is that you will find the services are not yet developed. Until the services are developed, it is difficult for you to construct the presentation to consume the service. Here what happens is if you have a skeleton of the XMLs available, it's easy to build your complete presentation using the standard XML framework, and then they just replace those things with the actual services later on. So this can actually happen parallelly, and we have found that this is very useful in a typical environment.
So can you further expand on how do you actually invoke a web service within the framework? Is there a special tag for this purpose? Or?
Yeah, so you have an action tag which is an action request, and you give what is the XML to be sent, and then you say that it's a return XML anyway, it goes back into it puts into the data buffer.
Which is the JavaScript.
Yeah, so you define an XML and it will invoke a standard JavaScript function which will take the XML format and make an XML HTTP request, get the response and put it in the buffer and put on the next hash.
Please elaborate.
Create UI test cases, right? You can create UI test cases with this also, right?
Yeah, like you can test the whole UI side with a few.
Separate from the server itself.
Yeah, so you can actually, we can have a standard servlet which will pick up your standard XMLs. When you make a request for a data, you can go and pick up a standard XML and return back so that you can text the full functionality with a set of standard responses. And then later on migrate it to the actual service.
So only problem is when data goes in the page, you're keeping a page, right? XML page. If the amount of data goes and suppose the user is performing any number of actions, they're storing everything in the page.
Yeah.
Slowly the iterations looping over every child, parent to child element will be slow, right? Every time.
See, what happens is you do the navigation in 2 steps. If your XML is hierarchically structured, your first navigation is to a large chunk of the module, and then your navigation, instead of doing from the top, you do only within the particular set of elements. And we have not noticed any degradation because of the large size of the XML.
So tracking on real-time data, sir?
Yeah.
Just want to adopt teaching more on rendering. How is it implemented?
It's basically JavaScript, like most of the other AJAX will do. You go to you do a equivalent of document.write. for the first time, and later on when you want to modify a part of the screen, you go to locate that particular HTML tag, and then replace the either inner or outer HTML depending on how you are doing it with the new version of the inner outer.
So you're saying that the entire framework is implemented on the client.
Yeah.
So how do you implement that on the client? How is the rendering engine actually implemented?
That's how you write a JavaScript. You can say document in a JavaScript. If you say document.write and give your HTML, it will actually paint the page. In fact, most of the AJAX framework do that. Even if you go to Google Web Toolkit, it's actually painting using a JavaScript.
So any web application which is created using this framework for simulation, it should load the entire framework to the client.
Basically, you load one HTML and a set of 3 or 4 JavaScript libraries, which anyway is called in the HTML, and then you get the main HTML job is to get the first page XML, and then just call the painting function, which will take the page and run it and paint the whole thing. And then onwards, you don't get any more HTML unless you're opening a new window. You simply use another page to repaint whatever part you want.
So, component library basically comprises of simple tag.
Component library is basically a set of JavaScript functions. One function for each of the different types of tag that you have. So if you have a menu tag, you'll have a menu.
Is it only that we built using HTML tag, right? The tag itself, the unique set of.
You define a tag saying that I have a menu tag which is supposed to show a menu. Now corresponding to the menu tag, it has certain parameters with it. What is the text? It will have sub nodes. So you have a corresponding JavaScript function whose job is to look at the look at the XML and do a document.write of your actual XML. Actual HTML. I mixed up the two. You look at the XML and paint the actual HTML.
How do you maintain session states and all that for a user?
In this particular case, your session is maintained in the server, right? But the advantage is that the state information mostly will be stored in your data buffer. So that's the next part of it.
When you go for pagination, suppose
Yeah.
there is 100 records in it, you're going for a pagination. Are you again asking the server to send the next set of data?
It's done both ways. Like you can do a pagination.
Everything needs to be edited.
It depends. Like if you go up to 50-60 records, you can do pagination on the client side. Or you can write a service on the server side which will do the pagination, and the grid can request data after 50 to get more. What we have found is that it's very easy. We have not come across any limitation in terms of saying that, okay, this we couldn't implement. Both in terms visually as well in terms of power.
Suppose the data buffer grows, at what point of time do you sense that the database buffer has grown and you have to limit it or you have to decrease it or delete it?
It basically depends on how long the user is using that particular application. Like typically user will use few hours, and many times such application you will be limited to some set of pages which you will be accessing. It is not that you go through some hundreds and hundreds of pages. So what we have found is with today's memory, a data buffer of some 100 records will consume how much? 100 into about 100K. And if you visit some 100 pages, this is how much? It's 10 MB. And what is the memory of the lowest end machine today? It is 100 times that. So you will not even notice it today. The power is such. Now we come to the security. The application is as secure as the service. Let's assume that your service takes care of your security needs. The only problem is that you are going to do some amount of caching on the client side, which opens up a possible security breach, which you need to consider the implication. The effect of standardization on productivity is something which is not fully appreciated by people. In my experience, we say that if you standardize and if you limit the option, your productivity goes up. And in fact, I have some data in projects to prove that it indeed does. From 20 to 30% increase can happen just simply by your standardizing what developers can use and what is to be used in a particular project. And this to some extent does that. It encapsulates many of the complexities which you have to go in normally, and it also does that loose coupling of segregating the presentation from the server-side programming, in which we have found that gives a very great advantage. Just to give an example, when we started initially, we were trying to do a struts-based implementation of the UI, and we also had examples of other places where struts-based implementation is done, and we find that it's about 50-50. The people who are constructing the service, if you have a project, there will be 50% effort will go into constructing the service and another 50% will go on constructing the UI, which I don't know whether your experience will be the same, but we have seen it in most of the projects. Once we implemented this, we found that the ratio becomes almost 1:3. That means if 3 people are writing the service, 1 person can complete the UI. So this is in a way shows that there is some productivity benefit. And with that, I come to the end. This is my email address. If any of you interested in knowing more about it or trying it out or any help, you can write to me. Any other questions, I'll be glad to take. I think there are about a couple of minutes left.
Any provisions for maintaining history management by the framework?
Being AJAX, your back button doesn't make sense. So you can't go back. However, we have implemented a couple of other things like offline working. Because the fact that you are downloading the page XML, you are having the data buffer. So you can actually go and say that, okay, if your connection gets cut or you want to go out and say take a flight, so you can actually keep using the application. And when you connect back, there is a provision to say sync. So it will make all the requests which is pending and upload it. It is open source, but the latest version has not been uploaded. If you are interested in using, just write to me. We'll make it available. Only thing is, if you are doing that offlining, you have to lower your browser security because this thing has to be saved in the local.
Is it suited for multi-user support?
Yeah, because the multi-user part of it is taken care by your service.
Multilingual?
Yes, it is multilingual. We have implemented in such a way that depending on the language, the page XML changes, your error messages changes. Yes, it is implemented. The problem is that it is open source, it's available in sourceforge.net, but it's a slightly older version. If you're interested, just write this is my mail address. Just write to me, I will give you the latest. XML is standard DOM parser, whatever JavaScript provides. JavaScript, HTML, that's all.
So if we use the JavaScript more in the page,
here your JavaScript rendering is stored in a few cells, library file and rendering engine. So the amount of page specific JavaScript which you have to write is very little. Most of the JavaScript is standard file which will get included automatically. So any specific logic which you have to implement, you have to write. Our example experience is in a page, you will probably write some 50 lines of JavaScript code. That's all.
so what is the
main advantage? It is simple and powerful. Means if you try to do some of the similar things in struts, especially implement AJAX, it's not so simple. In fact, one of the things, I don't know, any of you attended the previous session? Doctor? Thanks.
Thank you.